Game design is always evolving. What we have today has changed dramatically from what we had a decade ago. In each part of this series I look at two games, one past, one present, to see what's changed and what's persisted in the games industry. So sit back, relax, and take off those rose-tinted spectacles. This is Retro Dave. Hello and welcome to the first episode of what will hopefully be a long-running series. First off, we're going to be looking at a franchise. We're going to be looking at the Grand Theft Auto franchise in particular. The two games we'll be comparing will be Grand Theft Auto Vice City, what can be considered the best of the franchise, at least in my eyes, and we'll be looking at Grand Theft Auto 4 and its two expansion packs, which general consensus was that they were good games, but were a bit of a letdown compared to the previous style, where Grand Theft Auto 4 went for a more mature and realistic look. Grand Theft Auto Vice City was much more wacky and much more cartoony than 4 and its expansions. However, we'll go into that more in detail later on. First off, Grand Theft Auto Vice City is an old game, a very old game, and it is subject to quite a bit of the old nostalgia filter. So the first thing that I wanted to do when I played this game was to see exactly how it handles on modern systems, and first of all, comparing it technically to modern games. Now, this isn't talking about graphics. We can pretty much guarantee that the graphics will be worse. What I'm talking about is gameplay. We're talking about interface. We're talking about how the game actually controls, how well it runs on modern hardware. That is, does it run at all? Do you need to patch it? And will it work with modern control systems such as the Xbox 360 pad? Now, Grand Theft Auto Vice City was billed as a driving game. However, you do quite a bit on foot. You do quite a bit of shooting, you do quite a bit of running, you do quite a bit of jumping and a little bit of platforming at times. Let's just say this, on a modern system, comparing it to modern games, the combat controls are terrible. I mean, unforgivably terrible. I don't know how we let them get away with this back in the day. Maybe it's because our frame rates are higher, but the vertical mouse sensitivity is off the charts. Oh god. Just moving it slightly up makes you look at the ceiling, making gunplay completely unstable. And don't get me wrong, there is a mouse sensitivity slider, but the mouse sensitivity slider only changes your X sensitivity. I mean, really, it only changes your X sensitivity. Your Y sensitivity is still through the roof, so even if you change it down so that you can aim left and right easier, you make a slight move up, you're still looking at the ceiling and you're not aiming where you want to be. The first person mode is terrible. I mean, you get an assault rifle and when you right click, you go into first person mode, but you can't move, you can only aim, there's no dodging, there's no cover combat, and not only that, but all of a sudden your movement controls now control your view. So you move left and right, up and down, you use W, A, S and D like you would normally do to walk. You will end up moving up and down and looking left and right. This is quite annoying in a combat situation where you may have to switch to a better aiming mode on the fly, like you would normally do in a game like where it has over the shoulder mode and it sort of zooms in, you know, like Grand Theft Auto 4. I mean, I know the console version had auto aim and had snap to aim, and we being the PC elite master race decided we didn't need that, we had mouse controls. And I remember back in the day that it being completely fine, but I'm almost certain that was because we couldn't run it at any more than about 30 frames per second. Which meant that automatically your mouse sensitivity didn't actually matter all that much. Whereas now that we're running it at least 60, I hope you're running it at 60 on a modern machine anyway. Now that we're running at 60 frames per second, your mouse sensitivity has essentially doubled, or near enough doubled. And what we have essentially discovered is a bug in the game's code where the Y sensitivity is not taken into account. And speaking of frame rates, most modern systems should run this game at in excess of 60 frames per second. In fact, they should run it at least 200, maybe 1000 frames per second. However, the game is not designed to be run at those kind of frame rates, and you will need to turn the frame limiter on. You need to cap it at 60 frames per second, otherwise it will not run at all. It needs to limit it. You cannot run it any faster than that. otherwise the game won't even load. You literally cannot start a new game. You click new game, it goes to the black screen and fuck all happens. You need to go into the options and make sure frame limiter is turned on. Otherwise you won't be able to play the game. Not that that's much of a problem, it is a third person action game. I mean, it's a reasonable game anyway, running it at 30 to 60 frames per second. It's not like it's a Twitch game like a first person shooter where, you know, higher frames per second is actually really kind of required. Then we get on to the problem of the Xbox 360 controller. The Xbox 360 controller does not work with Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Not out of the box anyway. The camera will always stay in one position, it will always be pointing in one position, and you'll just be able to move left and right, forward and back, until you change it to classic controls, in which case the camera will slowly turn and follow you when you move. However, it is terrible for combat, and out of the box the Xbox 360 pad doesn't work. You cannot bind the right analog stick or the trigger buttons at all. You do need to use an external program for it. It will not. I mean, the PS1 controller. I think this was on PS1. It was on PS2 maybe. But they had dual analog sticks. We used the dual analog sticks. So why can't it detect the 360 ones? I don't know. But you do need to use an external program to bind those. So from a technical standpoint, Grand Theft Auto Vice City isn't doing too well, especially when you compare it to Grand Theft Auto 4. I mean, some people might complain about the foot controls in Grand Theft Auto 4 for being a bit too, I don't know, a bit too slow, a bit too clunky, but to be honest, I feel you've got a bit of weight behind you. You do lose a bit of control for it, but generally walking around feels like you're actually controlling a character and not Roadrunner. The gunplay is definitely better than Vice City. It's more intense, it's got a proper targeting system, and they didn't take out the auto-targeting for the PC version. Which, to be honest, I don't mind, because frankly I like playing it more on the 360 pad than I do with the mouse. Even though you get free look with the mouse and free aim with the mouse, which is a lot better than Vice City did. The auto lock-on system using the 360 pad is still superb. I mean, you lock on and you aim at their chest, but you do more with a headshot, and you do actually have to have some modicum of skill to actually aim at the head, or as I like to do, aim at the crotch, take out an arm, take out a leg. It actually makes them do something other than just sort of stagger in place and eventually fall down. The combat is much improved from Vice City, and I applaud them for that. They do have cover-based shooting, and I think it does work in Grand Theft Auto 4. It's not the best kind of mechanic I find for a shooter, but it works. It's fairly good. I mean, it's certainly a lot better than the Vice City, as I've said before, but, you know, what can you do? It's a bit of a mishmash of a game that 4 is. 4 doesn't really know if it's a driving game or a shooting game or both. In fact, it probably is just both. It's a nice little mix of everything, but it works well enough for my liking. It's not all good though. Gun controls on the bikes are still about as wonky as they'll ever be in Grand Theft Auto. They never fixed it for San Andreas all that much, and GTA 4 is still just as bad as Vice City was for the motorbikes shooting sections. It's just doesn't feel right at all. Using the controller, that is, using the mouse is fine. Also, elephant in the room, games for Windows Live. They won't let you save unless you're signed in, even though A, it's on Steam, and you get a serial key for it. It's like, why did you bother giving us a serial key for it when we have to be signed in order to save? It just seems utter nonsense. Steam doesn't mind. Steam will let you play games offline, like save it offline. It's a nitpick, really. If you don't mind all this DRM crap on your machine, go for it. But to be perfectly honest, games for Windows Live is a waste of fucking time. So while that's really the technical aspects out of the way, what are the gameplay comparisons? What about these two games have improved? What's changed over the years? Well, first off, the open world sandbox is much larger than it was in Vice City, although it's not as big as San Andreas. However, despite adding some little mini games in 4, it's not really progressed that far. I mean, you're doing exactly the same as you did in Vice City. You're driving cars, you're shooting bad guys, You're in an underworld full of drugs and double dealings and corruption and all this kind of stuff, and you're really only doing two types of missions. You're doing shooting missions and you're doing driving missions. There's very little actual variety in the missions, and it's not gotten any better in GTA 4. Thankfully, the improved combat controls and the improved foot controls mean that the missions aren't as much of a pain as they were in Vice City. The only thing that's really been added to 4 that was not in Vice City and wasn't really in San Andreas either are the little mini games. However, they did tend to throw them in your face, be it going bowling or the dating simulators. I mean, you had to do the dating simulators to progress through the story. You had to go bowling to progress through the story. I mean, these are little things that should be in the game, but they should be optional for you to do. They should mention that they're there. They should definitely mention that they're there, but they shouldn't be throwing it at you every 5 minutes. One good thing, obviously, about Vice City is it didn't have people phoning you every 5 minutes asking you to go bowling. I mean, we're talking about a game here where you go around running over pedestrians and can randomly shoot them in the street. This is a game that appeals to sociopaths. It appeals to the sociopath inside of us. It's a bit of escapism, and when we want a bit of escapism, we don't want to go bowling. We don't want to go on a date when we want to escape from the real world. Invading this into Grand Theft Auto, one of the greatest escape games that I've ever played, really doesn't do much for me. I was really hating, by the end of that game, all these little interruptions in the minigames going, no, I don't want to do anything, no, stop, just turn it off. What they learned, though, was to turn those off for the expansions. Ballad of Gay Tony and The Lost and the Damned had almost zero reminders and interruption phone calls. I think maybe in The Lost and the Damned I had maybe 4 or 5, and some of those were just like, you know, remember that you can call for backup. Ballad of Gay Tony had come round to the club and do some time at the club. I didn't do any of those mini games, and they phoned maybe 2, 3 times throughout the whole campaign, and I think they kind of did learn the lesson that they maybe were throwing it in your face a little bit too much. So that was an improvement, and it was an improvement that came very quickly. But other than the mini-games, nothing has actually really been added to the Grand Theft Auto franchise in terms of gameplay. It's been improved gameplay, certainly. The driving has been improved. I think the walking combat and all that kind of stuff has been improved. Definitely the gunplay is improved. The vehicle controls, helicopter controls, boat controls, everything's been improved. But nothing's been added, which is my main bone of contention with the series, is that they don't tend to innovate, they just seem to iterate. And we can only hope that the next one is a lot better and has more things in it, not just this whole vaunted you can play as 3 characters thing, because technically we kind of have that in 4 with the expansions. One of the big things about the Grand Theft Auto series from 3 onwards was the fact that they wanted to tell a story, and they told a story reasonably well. However, Grand Theft Auto Vice City was the one that keeps sticking in my mind as having the best story, because it was the first one that actually had a protagonist that actually spoke. With your character in Vice City, you were a character. He was a character. He was a real character, a real person with motivations that you just happened to control and weave in through these storylines. And I thought it told a really good story. However, they tell the same story every time, just with different characters, different locations. I mean, you start out with nothing. There's some kind of betrayal. You have to work yourself up the criminal ladder. There'll be a mafia or triads or both. There'll be ethnic street gangs, biker gangs, some rather unscrupulous and sleazy businessmen, and you'll eventually face off against the person who betrayed you in the final showdown. It happens in Vice City, it happens in 3, it happens in San Andreas, and it happens in 4 and The Lost and the Damned. It happens in the Ballad of Gay Tony as well. What 4 and its DLC does that Vice City didn't is give us a much deeper and complex characters than before. Sure, they're not the deepest characters to have ever graced fiction, but compared to Vice City's cavalcade of caricatures, it's slightly refreshing. Let's compare 2 of them. Let's compare your somewhat sidekicks. In Vice City, you had the neurotic, nervous lawyer, Ken Rosenberg, and in 4, you had the neurotic, annoying Roman Bellic. Ken starts off Vice City cowering and panicking and ends it in exactly the same way. He goes through no character development. He is purely there as a plot device to drive the story along.
And now you must leave us
Roman,
before
however,
we reach the open seas.
He may be,
I will lower
with
my
his
personal
constant
launch.
phone calls and
Keep
let's
it,
go
my friend.
bowling,
The token
does
of my
actually
gratitude.
change.
Thank you, Colonel.
He starts out
One more
confident,
request.
rather overconfident,
While I'm
behind
away,
which hides an erotic
could you
escape
keep an eye
plan.
on Mercedes for me?
Over the course
I
of the
think she
game,
could
he
look
gets
after herself,
thoroughly
but
broken
sure,
through
I'll keep an
all
eye
the
out.
things that
Gracias,
your player
amigo.
character Nico puts
Hasta
him through.
luego.
Adios,
You see him
amigo.
break down and eventually build himself back up. He goes through as much of a journey in the game as Nico does, and is arguably the most complex character in the game, and most affected by what happens in the story. Sure, 4 isn't perfect, it still has its one-note characters, it's got a few card-carrying villains, and more than a few racial stereotypes floating about out there, and although with so many characters in a story, you can't expect every single one of them to get as much character development as the main character does, or the main character's sidekick. So I can't expect a game like this to have them disappear at all. 4 may have improved its storytelling, but it's far from perfect, and in that, well, there is a lot of room for improvement. In both Vice City and in 4, and indeed all of the other GTA games, there's just something that has never changed. Other than the final mission in 4, there is absolutely no choice in how you complete a mission. There is no choice, you cannot affect the storyline at all. For a sandbox world, the missions are fairly linear, and it's quite jarring when you consider the point of a sandbox is to play as you want, but you have no control over the world itself. It's completely static. Sure, some missions that you do change the way the world actually looks, like for example in Vice City, when you blow up a building site, the building site changes and actually opens up some jumps for you to do. The same thing happens in 4 when you blow up a garage, but those are all tiny little cosmetic details that are affected by you just progressing through the game as you would normally. There's no choice in that, and it just does seem a bit odd that such an open game has such a small, static, linear storyline. I mean, even something, I'll bring another game into this, it's not the point of this, but we'll bring another game into it, bring Skyrim into it. It's not got the most complex of plots, however, there is a lot of story going on. There is a lot of little tiny stories going on that you don't have to be a part of. And each of those little stories can be completed in a completely different way, giving you different rewards, giving you different faction bonuses, giving you, well, basically you can do it in very many different ways. Some are good, some are evil, and it's just up to you how you play through it, and it's got a lot of replayability in that fact. Grand Theft Auto is a game that you probably will never go back to. It's very much like a film. It will be the same every time you play it, and really that's kind of goes against how I think a sandbox world should be. And even then, despite its pretensions as a sandbox game, you still have to complete a certain amount of the storyline in order to unlock the entire sandbox. Sure, the expansions for 4, the Ballad of Gaytoni and the Lost of the Damned, let you run through the whole city at the start, but a lot of the extras, a lot of the challenge missions had to be unlocked by completing certain portions of the story, especially in the Ballad of Gaytoni, where you can't do the underground boxing until you've done it the first time, you can't do the gang war until you've done that the first time, you can't do the parachutings until you've base jumped the first time, all that kind of stuff. The little bits that make up a sandbox game have to be unlocked by completing the storyline. And that's not really a good enough incentive for me to actually say the storyline is good. The stories are all identical, they just have different characters and different dialogue. They are essentially the same story. They are Scarface. Every single game from Vice City onwards, yeah, even 3, was just Scarface in a different location with different people. What I would really like to see is you having the ability to affect the outcome of the game. Pick a faction, pick the Lost Motor Club, pick the Mafia, pick the Triads, pick the Haitian street gangs, pick maybe 1 or 2 different factions that aren't completely diametrically opposed. You could do something like, for example, I'll bring another game into it, why not? Fallen Earth. Nobody will ever played that is listening to this, surely. But in Fallen Earth, you had a wheel of factions. You had 6 factions. You had a faction that was allied with the 2 on the left and right of it, and it was diametrically opposed to the one opposite it. So, say the Mafia and the Triads are having an all-out gang war. You could choose the Mafia, and then you could choose the Lost. You could probably choose another faction on the other side, but Lost are having a full-out battle with the Angels of Death. So if you chose the Triads, you could do the Triads and the Angels of Death and fighting off against the Mafia and the Lost. So you would have a kind of wheel that you'd be able to choose 2 factions that are close by each other. That would be it would allow you to change the way the game is played out. It would probably change who your final boss was. It would change who betrayed you, it would change who you worked for, it would change the way the story was played out, and it would make the game incredibly replayable, even if it was shorter. You could have the same amount of content, just split it over 3, maybe 4 playthroughs. And so storytelling is where they can actually improve the game, I think. Because the combat, they've kind of nailed down the combat, I think. They've kind of nailed down the driving, they've kind of nailed down the narrative. They need to expand the way the story is actually driven. That's where Grand Theft Auto should be going. That's where I'm worried it's not going. It's been over a decade since Grand Theft Auto 3, and the biggest addition to storytelling that they have had is making the player character speak. Beyond the storytelling, each of the stories is set in different places. Their settings are well chosen, to be perfectly honest. I think they've kind of nailed down where they want to be with the games and how they actually design the games and the soundtracks that go with it. In fact, I would still say that Vice City has the better soundtrack. The characters fit in with the settings that they put them in, even though that some might be more serious than others might be a bit more wacky. You really can't fault them though on the fact that the characters fit in where they're supposed to be. They are believable characters to the most part, even the most batshit crazy and wacky, insane characters like Love Fist in Vice City. They fit in that era, they fit in that game really well. And in 4, they've got all the sort of immigrant gangsters, they've got the mafia, they've got the businessmen, they've got the corrupt government agents and all that kind of stuff. And they all fit in that world. They've made a really good world, even though some people don't like the fact that it's a bit more realistic, a bit more brown than previous games, a little less colourful. But I don't mind them trying things new. If they try something new and it doesn't work, that's fine. So long as it hasn't completely ruined the game, I will still give them kudos for trying. Because if you don't try, you don't get better. I mean, they tried with the mini games, and I think most people thought they were a bit shit. So when the expansions came out, they downplayed them. They were still in the game. They didn't remove anything from it. They just removed the fact they pushed them into your face, which is a good step forward. They need to just try more little things. Change the ways. They tried this little bit at the end of 4, where you get to control what happens at the end. And that is the little glimmer of hope that I have, that they will try something much bigger for 5, even though they haven't announced that kind of thing in 5. Because if they announce that, the internet will go crazy. They may be keeping that for closer to launch. This is what I'm hoping for, even though it's incredibly wishful thinking. Because I am a story person, I love my stories. I love stories in video games. I think video games are an incredibly good way of telling stories. But Grand Theft Auto needs to evolve. It has done its storytelling ways to death, and they are beginning to show signs of aging. So in retrospect, Vice City doesn't really hold up all that well, especially in the controls area. Its storytelling is just as good as 4 is. The only problem is that 4 storytelling is just as good as Vice City's. It hasn't changed, it hasn't evolved, and it needs to. Combat's gotten better. It's at a place where I think they can now just look at the story and move on. If you want to go back and play Vice City, I more than wholeheartedly say you should, because it's always nice to get rid of those rose-tinted spectacles, and I can tell you that my rose-tinted spectacles were shattered when I played Vice City again. If you actually want a decent play at Vice City, look around for some of the mods for Vice City. They'll help you with the control systems, they'll help you with the frame rate issues, they'll help you with the Xbox 360 controller, and they'll add a lot more to the game. I seem to remember there being quite a few mods out when I was playing it on PC back in the day, especially things that changed the helicopters into DeLoreans from Back to the Future. That was always quite fun. And the ones that added in the stunt racing tracks, those were always good. So look into the modding scene for Vice City. Vice City has had a ton of mods. Go back and play San Andreas. San Andreas I quite enjoyed as well. And go back and play 4. They are excellent games, but they're all very similar. So hopefully you've enjoyed this. Hopefully it's been informative. I have a few more ideas for topics for Retro Dave, including the comparison of stealth action games, starting with the Thief series and Dishonored. And if Sega decides to stop shutting down channels, I will be doing a comparison between Sonic Adventure and Sonic Generations, and have a general nostalgia-fueled trip down Sonic memory lane. But that's only if Sega of Japan stop being arseholes. If anyone does have any ideas for the show, feel free to leave them in the comment section. Just remember that the old game needs to be at least 4 years old, and the new game has to be more than 5 years old. However, they must have at least 3 years apart. So leave them in the comment section if you do want, and remember they have to be of the same genre, not just of the same franchise. Also, please limit it to games that have had a PC release, because I don't have a capture card for consoles, so you won't be getting any footage off of it. So I've been Big Dave, thank you for watching, and like I said, hopefully I will be back with a Sonic the Hedgehog video. Game design is always evolving. What we have today has changed dramatically from what we had. That's all, folks.